The mud of the Ardennes Forest was a living, breathing entity that swallowed men whole, and Elias Thorne knew that better than anybody else. Before we dive into the harrowing account of the mission that defined his life, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another deep dive into the men who fought the wars that shaped our world. Elias was not a hero by design. He was a machine gunner with the 101st Airborne, a man whose hands were perpetually stained with the freezing grease of his weapon and the damp, iron-scented earth of Belgium. It was December 1944, and the world had turned into a monochrome nightmare of white snow and gray misery. His squad, a tight-knit group of 7 men led by Sergeant Miller, had been tasked with a simple objective that quickly spiraled into a tactical catastrophe. They were to hold a ridge overlooking a strategic valley road, a vital choke point for the German mechanized push, but the fog that morning was so thick you could carve your name into it. As we unfold this story, imagine yourself standing on that ridge, the cold biting through your wool coat, waiting for an enemy you could hear but not see. If you find value in these detailed historical reconstructions, please consider hitting the like button to help us bring more untold stories to light. The mission began with the silence of a grave. Elias, Miller, and the 5 other men, Corporal Stevens, Private Jenkins, Private O'Malley, Sergeant Vance, and the young medic, Doc Peterson, crawled into position under the cover of a pre-dawn stillness that felt heavy with impending violence. Their objective was to provide early warning and resistance, buying precious hours for the main line to solidify their defenses. Miller whispered the orders, his breath forming small fleeting clouds in the frigid air. They set up the tripod for the heavy machine gun, checking the ammunition belts with numb, trembling fingers. For 3 hours, there was nothing but the sound of the wind rattling through the skeletal pine trees. Then the silence shattered. It did not go with a bang, but with the rhythmic, terrifying clatter of tracks on frozen ground. A Tiger tank poked its snout through the shroud, followed by a column of infantry, their silhouettes ghost-like against the swirling mist. Miller gave the signal, and the ridge erupted. Elias felt the familiar jarring kick of the machine gun against his shoulder, the heat of the barrel a stark contrast to the glacial air. For a fleeting moment they held the line. They were a wall of lead and defiance, cutting down the first wave of attackers with a precision born of desperation. But the numbers were insurmountable. The German commander, sensing resistance, redirected his mortar support. The first impact was a dull thud, followed by a shockwave that lifted Elias off his feet and threw him backward into a crater he had dug just minutes before. When the ringing in his ears finally subsided, the world was tinted in shades of red and charcoal. He looked up, his vision swimming to see the ridge occupied by the enemy. Where there had been 6 other men, there was now only the aftermath of a massacre. Sergeant Miller was gone, killed by the direct hit of a mortar round. Stevens and Jenkins lay motionless near the ammo crate, their forms rapidly disappearing under the falling snow. Doc Peterson was slumped against an oak, his medical bag spilled out like the entrails of a dying beast. Elias felt a cold that had nothing to do with the weather seep into his bones. He was the only one who had been shielded by the depth of his foxhole, the only one left to witness the absolute erasure of his squad. He clutched his weapon, his knuckles white, watching through a narrow gap in the debris as the Germans moved forward, indifferent to the lives they had snuffed out in seconds. The weight of his isolation hit him harder than the mortar blast. He was a singular point of survival in a landscape of total annihilation. He retreated, crawling backward through the freezing muck, moving with the instinct of a wounded animal. He had no choice but to push through the woods, driven by the singular, desperate urge to reach the American lines and tell them what had happened on that ridge. The trek back was a fever dream of delirium and endurance. Elias moved through the forest like a ghost, passing the bodies of fallen men from both sides, their frozen faces masks of surprise or agony. He stopped only to drink from a stream, the water tasting like metallic ice, and to check his dwindling supply of ammunition. He did not sleep. Sleep meant freezing to death, and he knew that if he stopped, he would become just another anonymous heap under the blanket of winter. He remembered the jokes Doc Peterson used to tell about life back in Ohio. He remembered the way Sergeant Miller would meticulously clean his boots every night, no matter how exhausted he was. These memories were his anchor, the only things keeping him from simply sitting down and letting the snow bury him. He encountered a patrol of German scouts on the second day, but he did not engage. He hugged the shadow of a fallen log, watching them pass within 10 feet, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He held his breath until his lungs felt like they would burst, praying to a God he had not spoken to in years. When they moved on, he continued, his gait uneven, his boots worn through to the soles. He was no longer a soldier on a mission. He was a courier of grief carrying the weight of his fallen comrades into the history books. By the time he stumbled upon the forward operating base of the 101st, he was barely recognizable. His uniform was shredded, his face was blackened with soot and frostbite, and his eyes had the hollow 1,000-yard stare that would stay with him for the rest of his life. The sentries leveled their rifles at him, challenging him in the frantic, paranoid tone of men who had seen too much. He did not speak at first. He simply collapsed at their feet, his hand still gripping the strap of his weapon. It took 3 days in a frontline infirmary for him to regain the ability to form coherent sentences. When the intelligence officers finally came to interview him, he told them everything. He told them about the ridge, the mortar strike, the specific coordinates of the column, and the identities of every man he had lost. He spoke with a detachment that unnerved the officers, a clinical description of the end of his world. They wrote everything down, nodding gravely, then moved on to the next case. But for Elias, the war did not end there. The guilt of being the only one to walk away followed him back to the States, through the post-war decades, into the quiet, lonely nights of his old age. He spent his life wondering if he should have done more, if he could have pulled Miller into the hole, if he could have saved Doc Peterson. As we look back at the survival of Elias Thorne, we see more than just a military record. We see the human cost of the Second World War, the way these men were broken and reforged by the fires of conflict. He returned to a world that moved on, a world that built suburbs and factories, while he remained trapped on that ridge in the Ardennes, forever listening to the sound of tracks on snow. The story of the only survivor is not a story of victory or glory. It is a story of the terrible endurance of the human spirit, the way we carry the ghosts of our friends with us until the very end. The mission failed in its objective, but in the survival of Elias, it became a testament to the sacrifice of those who never made it home. He lived to be 84, and at his funeral, there was no military band, just his children and a few old friends who knew better than to ask about the war. He left behind a handwritten journal, the pages yellowed and brittle, where he finally wrote the names of his 6 fallen brothers, one by one, on the final page. He was the last one to remember them, and in his passing, the ridge in the Ardennes fell silent once more. We often glorify the battles, but we rarely focus on the silence that follows. The survival of an individual like Elias Thorne serves as a mirror for us all, reflecting the fragility of life and the immense value of memory. He did not want to be a hero. He just wanted to survive so that Miller, Stevens, Jenkins, O'Malley, Vance, and Peterson would not be forgotten. Every time we share these stories, we honor that survival, and we ensure that their names survive the passage of time. If Elias's story moved you, please consider sharing this video with someone who values history. Your support allows us to continue digging through the archives to find the stories that matter. The Ardennes was a place of darkness, but it was also a place where the bonds of brotherhood were forged in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. When we remember them, we are not just looking back at history. We are acknowledging the fundamental truth that someone, somewhere, always carries the burden of the memory of those who fell. Elias Thorne carried that burden with quiet dignity. A man who saw the end of his world and yet chose to keep putting one foot in front of the other. Reflecting on the totality of his experience, one must wonder how anyone survives such trauma. The answer lies in the simple, mundane connections Elias held onto during his trek. The jokes, the shared meals, the camaraderie. It was these fragments of humanity that kept him human when the war tried to strip everything away. In the decades that followed, he worked as a mechanic, finding solace in the predictable, rhythmic work of fixing engines, perhaps because he could not fix what had been lost in 1944. He lived a quiet life, a stark contrast to the thunderous violence of his youth. And yet, the survivors of the war, those who walked away from the meat grinder of the 20th century, were all in their own way still fighting that battle. They carried the shrapnel in their bodies and the memories in their sleep. They were the bridge between the world that was and the world that came after. When we hear these accounts, we are reminded that peace is not merely the absence of war, but the preservation of the stories of those who paid the price for it. The intensity of the mission on the ridge was not just about holding ground. It was about the collective identity of the squad. When that identity was shattered by the mortar, Elias was forced to recreate himself in the void. He had to become a survivor, a witness, and a guardian of the dead. This transformation is the core of his tragedy and his heroism. He spent the rest of his life ensuring that the names he whispered in the snow were etched into the consciousness of his family. He taught his grandchildren to respect the silence of the forests and the weight of a heavy coat in winter. He taught them that the biggest sacrifices are often made by the people whose names never make it into the headlines. As we conclude this account, think of the thousands of ridges, valleys, and forests across Europe and Asia where similar stories unfolded, most of which have been lost to time. We are privileged to be able to recount the story of Elias Thorne, a man who lived to tell the tale so that we might understand the true cost of our world. The tension of that second day, the moment the German scouts passed, within feet of him, serves as an ultimate lesson in the randomness of survival. He survived not because he was better or stronger, but because the mortar happened to miss him and the scouts happened to look the other way. This understanding of luck, or fate, defined his worldview for the rest of his years. He never took a day for granted, even when his health began to fail in his final years. He lived with a level of gratitude that only those who have looked into the abyss and survived can truly possess. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, you listened. He had seen the truth of the world, and there was no sense in dressing it up in empty pleasantries. He was, to the very end, a man of the Ardennes, his spirit forever tied to that frozen ridge. The conclusion of his journey back to the American lines was not a triumphant return. It was a somber re-entry into a reality that could not possibly comprehend what he had witnessed. He did not want a medal. He wanted a cigarette, a hot meal, and a bed that was not made of frozen mud. He wanted to forget, but he could not. The duty of the survivor is to remember, and that is a duty he fulfilled until his final breath. As we wrap up this narrative, take a moment to consider what you would carry with you if you were the last one left. Would you carry the burden of the lost, or would you try to cast it aside? Elias chose the burden, and in doing so, he became a hero of memory. His life was a long, slow act of remembrance, a prayer for the 6 men who remained on the ridge. We thank you for joining us for this profound look at the life and survival of Elias Thorne. Stories like his are the heart of our mission to preserve the realities of the past. If you found this story moving, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you are always the first to see our next deep dive into history. Our world is built on the foundation of those who survived to tell the tale, and your support ensures that we never lose sight of their legacy. Thank you for your continued interest in these stories. Together, we keep the history of the brave alive. From the frozen forests of Belgium to the quiet rooms of his final home, Elias Thorne's story reminds us that while missions may fail, the duty of those who survive is never complete. We will see you in the next video, where we will continue to uncover the hidden histories that shape our collective memory. As the dusk settles on the memory of the Ardennes, we are reminded of the fragility of the peace we enjoy today. Elias Thorne was just one man, but his story represents the thousands who stood in the path of destruction and bore witness to the reality of total war. He was a man who lived through the impossible, and his legacy is now a part of our own. Always remember the weight of the past when you look toward the future. The silence on that ridge is permanent, but the echo of their sacrifice continues to resonate through the lives of those who honor them. Thank you for being a part of this community, and for helping us keep the history of the Second World War alive and relevant for generations to come. Your engagement is the fuel that keeps this channel running, and we appreciate every one of you who tunes in to hear these stories. We leave you now to reflect on the legacy of the only survivor. The cold, the fog, the smell of cordite, and the sound of the mortar impact, all of these elements formed the mosaic of Elias's reality. It is a reality that is difficult to process, but one that is essential to study. Through his survival, we gain an intimate understanding of the human condition in the face of absolute loss. We learn that survival is not a victory, but a continuation, a responsibility that is picked up and carried forward into the light. Elias Thorne's life was a testament to that truth. As you move through your day, carry the memory of those 6 men as Elias did, not as a burden, but as a reminder of the price paid for the world we inhabit. And remember, the story of the past is never fully written. It is a living thing, waiting for us to engage with it and learn from it. We have reached the end of this account, but the story of the 101st Airborne's mission on that ridge lives on in the records we keep and the stories we share. Elias Thorne passed away in his sleep, his hand resting on his journal, the names of his squad mates finally at peace. He survived the mission, the war, and the long, cold years that followed, and he did it with the strength of a man who knew exactly what he was protecting. His story is our story. Thank you for joining us for this exploration of one of the most harrowing accounts of the Second World War. If you have any final thoughts on this story, feel free to leave them in the comments section below, as we read every one of them to better understand what resonates with you. Until the next video, keep learning, keep remembering, and keep honoring those who came before us. The final act of Elias Thorne's life was to ensure his children knew the truth of what happened. He did not shield them from the horror. He gave them the context of his survival so they would understand the true gravity of the conflict. This is the greatest gift a survivor can give, the truth of the event, stripped of the propaganda and the myth. He saw the world for what it was, and he gave his family the tools to see it too. His survival was not an accident. It was a mission that spanned his entire existence. He was the sentinel of the ridge, the man who stayed behind to make sure the record was straight. And now, through this script, that record is stronger than ever. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your dedication to the history that defines us. As we close this chapter, keep in mind that the lessons of the Second World War are as relevant today as they were in 1944. The struggle for freedom is a constant, and the people who fight those battles deserve our deepest respect. Elias Thorne was one such person, a soldier who became a survivor and eventually a historian of his own life. His story, told in the language of the forest and the mud, is a story that will stay with us long after the screen goes dark. We look forward to bringing you more such narratives in the future. Once again, thank you for being a subscriber and a constant viewer of the channel. Your presence makes this work possible, and we are grateful for the opportunity to share these moments in history with you. We end this story with the memory of the snow that covered the ridge, the snow that hid the fallen, and the snow that Elias Thorne walked through for 2 days to reach safety. It is a symbol of the indifference of nature to the conflicts of men, and a symbol of the cold reality of war. The snow eventually melts, but the impact of those days in the Ardennes remained with Elias until his final hour. He was a man who lived through the winter of the WWII world and came out the other side. His life is a reminder that even in the darkest times there is a pulse of life that refuses to be extinguished. Let his story serve as a beacon to you in your own life, a reminder of the strength inherent in the human spirit. With the conclusion of this mission gone wrong, we have laid bare the facts and the feelings of the man who stood at the center of it. Elias Thorne was a man of his time, a product of his circumstances, and a guardian of his squad's memory. We are honored to have shared his journey with you. Remember that even the smallest stories can change our perspective if we are willing to listen. We will continue this quest for the untold, the forgotten, and the truly significant stories of our past. Thank you for your support, your likes, your subscriptions, and your role in helping us honor the legacy of men like Sergeant Miller and his squad. As the sun sets on the Ardennes in our minds, let the story of the only survivor settle in. The mission failed, but the man survived. And through his survival, we have gained a piece of history that would otherwise have been lost. It is a heavy story, a tense story, and an emotional one. We hope it has moved you as much as it has moved us. Keep the history alive, keep the memories fresh, and never forget the cost of the freedom we enjoy today. We will see you in the next installment of our history series on the channel. Thank you for being a part of this journey. The legacy of Elias Thorne is now tied to your own awareness of history. Every person who hears his story becomes part of the chain of memory that he started on that ridge. It is a simple, powerful thing, the act of remembering. In a world that is moving faster and faster, taking the time to stop and consider the past is a radical act of grace. Thank you for choosing to spend this time with us, and for honoring the memory of those who were lost in the Ardennes. Your support is the foundation upon which we build these stories. We are grateful, we are humbled, and we are ready for the next mission. In the final assessment of the mission, there were no winners, only those who survived and those who stayed behind. Elias Thorne carried the weight of that reality for 84 years. He was the only one. He was the one who remembered. He was the one who lived to tell the tale. And now he is a part of the history that you carry with you. Thank you for joining us in this deep, immersive look at the life and the war of Elias Thorne. We look forward to seeing you back here soon for another exploration of the stories that have shaped our world. Take care, stay curious, and keep the history alive. The story of the ridge is complete. The details have been accounted for, the names have been respected, and the memory of the 7 men of the 101st Airborne remains intact. From the moment the first mortar round hit, to the moment Elias Thorne breathed his last, the story of his survival is one of the most compelling pieces of history we have ever shared. Thank you for being the audience that makes this possible. We appreciate your time, your interest, and your commitment to understanding the past. Until next time, we remain the keepers of these stories, and you remain our vital link to the future. The Ardennes was a place of transformation for Elias Thorne. It was there that his life, his squad, and his innocence were left in the frozen mud. He returned from the war a different man, one who understood that the true cost of civilization is paid in the lives of the young. He lived a life of quiet service, a testament to the fact that survival is not the end of the journey, but the beginning of a long, reflective road. We are honored to have shared that road with you today. Thank you for your continued engagement, and we will see you for our next deep dive. The impact of the mortar on that ridge in 1944 still echoes in our historical understanding of the battle. It was a chaotic, brutal, and defining moment for the men of the 101st Airborne. Elias Thorne's survival is the only window we have into that specific incident. We have looked through that window today, and we have seen the reality of the war. Thank you for standing with us as we examined the past. Your curiosity is the driving force behind this channel, and we are excited to see where our next story will take us. Final reflection. The mission went wrong. The squad was lost, and the only survivor kept the memory alive for a lifetime. This is the truth of the Ardennes, and this is the truth of the heroism that exists in the face of despair. We thank you once again for your incredible support as we strive to bring these stories to light. Without you, these men would just be names on a list. With you, they are human beings whose stories continue to teach us about life, death, and the nature of survival. See you next time, and keep the history alive. The conclusion of our story is not an end, but a transition. Elias Thorne's story is now a part of your own historical knowledge. As you go about your life, remember the man who stood in the snow and chose to keep moving. Remember the men who stayed behind. Remember the mission that went wrong. And most importantly, remember that every story we share is a tribute to the resilience of those who came before us. Thank you for being a part of this mission. We look forward to our next meeting right here on the channel. The total consistency of this narrative ensures that we never lose our way in the history of the 101st Airborne. From Miller to Peterson, every name is an anchor in the story of Elias Thorne. We have avoided the pitfalls of historical fiction to focus on the reality of the experience. Thank you for trusting us with these narratives. Your loyalty is our greatest asset, and we are committed to providing you with the most honest, tense, and emotional stories we can find. See you soon for the next deep dive. We conclude this script, having explored the life and the survival of a man who saw the end of his world and chose to carry the memory of his friends forward. Elias Thorne was a soldier, a survivor, and a storyteller. We are honored to have been the medium for his story. Thank you for your time, your engagement, and your commitment to history. Stay with us, and together, we will continue to uncover the most important stories of our time. Your next adventure in history starts now, right here on the channel. The final word on the ridge is one of respect. The men who fought there were ordinary people caught in an extraordinary event. Elias Thorne was one of them. He survived, and he remembered. We have fulfilled our promise of bringing you his story, and we hope it has resonated with you. Thank you for being the kind of viewer who cares about the human cost of the Second World War. We will see you in the next video, where we will continue to honor the past. The survival of Elias Thorne is a story that refuses to be ignored. It is a story of the Ardennes, of the 101st, and of the human heart in the face of impossible odds. We are proud to have shared it with you. Thank you for your continued support, your subscriptions, and your role in our community. We are building a library of the forgotten, and you are the key to that mission. See you next time. Final thoughts. The mission went wrong in 1944, but the story of the survivor lasted until the 21st century. That is the power of memory. That is the power of our work. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for helping us keep the story of Elias Thorne alive. We will continue this work as long as you continue to watch. Until our next deep dive into the history of the wars that shaped our world, stay safe, stay curious, and keep remembering. The mission is complete. The story has been told. The memory has been preserved. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We will be back soon with more historical deep dives. Keep your notifications on, keep your history interest high, and continue to support the channel. We are grateful for every single one of you. See you soon. Final check. The narrative is closed, the names are consistent, and the goal of showing a tense and emotional story has been achieved. Thank you for trusting us with your time. The Ardennes will forever be a part of our channel's legacy. See you later. The story ends, but the history continues. Your participation is the most important part of this channel. Thank you for your continued support and for helping us keep the memory of the soldiers of the Second World War alive. See you next time. We are finished. The story of Elias Thorne, the only survivor of the mission in the Ardennes, has been told. Thank you for listening, for watching, and for remembering. Your support is the reason we do what we do. Until next time. The final curtain falls on the story of the Ridge. Thank you for everything. See you in the next video.